Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think the last attendees are coming in. So it's spring in Cape Town. Here we are in what I still call the Fugard, and so it must be open book, which is great. Welcome to this session. It's a session called The Personal as Political. It's going to get quite personal. It's going to get quite, it might even get uncomfortable at times. So like all good sadomasochists, we need a safe word. So our safe word today is book lounge. If you need to find your way to safety, that's the word you can raise. Margie's looking at me in disbelief. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got three amazing books and three amazing people. Barbara Boswell's book, The Comrade's Wife. It's a novel, or is it? It's an amazing story of a woman who is genuinely in love. And it's an exploration of what that means for her and how she allows herself to be misled because of that. So we'll be talking to Barbara about her character and that deception. Buntu Siwisa's book, Paperless, also a novel, also very personal, it seems, to me, and we'll ask him about that, about being an African scholar in Oxford, about being paperless in the sense of being illegal in terms of the bureaucracy, a book about trying to find a home, trying to make a foreign place a home, and whether one can succeed and how one can succeed. And then Margie Orford's book, Love and Fury, a memoir, amazingly personal, intimate story about Margie, but also not about Margie, also about possibly everybody who's experienced the kinds of things that she expresses in here, and in particular women, although very interesting, talking to Margie just before, saying how many men have responded positively to this book and said to her, thank you for writing it because of the kinds of insights that they have gained from it into their own relationships. So we're going to start with a question that has colloquially become known as, why didn't you just burn it? It's about catharsis, and all three books are cathartic. All three books express the author seeking some kind of personal healing in the process of writing. And my question to all three is it enough to write it? And can you then put it in the top drawer and lock it away? Or have a bonfire and ritually burn it? Or do you need to publish it, and do you need people to read it? And if so, why does catharsis need an audience? Why does it work better if there is somebody reading your story? I'm going to start with Margie. Margie, your response to that question.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you all for coming. It's lovely to be here in Cape Town, my favorite festival. Some of you might know I've written a few novels before this memoir. And it was a very different kind of experience in some ways, although what I learned through writing novels really helped me shape the fiction. So my novels, those of you who've read them, you know they have a lot of pace. And then I wrote the memoir and it had the same pace, which is absolute rubbish because my life has had like zero pace. But yeah, Andrew sent us that question, like could it have gone in he said the bonfire. I thought more a bin fire would be apt for mine. And I thought about the answer. You know, the idea of catharsis in memoir or of life writing, in fact, you need to do the catharsis before. And then for me, the writing was very much a kind of shaping of an insight that I'd had. But obviously, the writing helped me get to an insight. I started it because I couldn't write a suicide note. And I couldn't understand why I couldn't write. I can write anything at all, and I couldn't write this thing. And it was this thing that the very thing, my creativity and my capacity for life protected me. That I found very interesting. Could I have put it away and burnt it? Yes, in some ways, but the discovery that I had with this book, which is perhaps slightly deviating from what you asked me, is that I'd finished the book, and those of you who've read it will know this is not a spoiler in any way. My very beloved sister died just as I had finished about 2.5 years ago. And we were so close. We talked to each other all the time. And I couldn't open the manuscript. I got the call like halfway through the edit, and I just couldn't open the manuscript for 1.5 years after that. And then I went back, and my editor helped me, and I finished the book. And my sister, who was alive all through my life, she's only 2 years younger than me. I had only one memory where she wasn't. I realized that I would never write another word that was not in memoriam. So the most important relationship for me in my life was with her, and I'd lost her. And I refelt all the grief because she'd just been alive. She was so ordinary. You know how irritating your siblings are? They're just there, like always there, taking your stuff. Doesn't matter how old you get. And that feeling was gone. So if I had known that that would happen, I would not have finished that book. Because there was a part of my mind where she was always alive, and the book closed that chapter. So personally, I would not have finished it, but I have finished it. And some people are glad I did, and some people are not.
I think my response to you is there's this kind of sense that writing a memoir is selfish. And I think it's quite the contrary. I think if you'd written that manuscript and put it in a top drawer, that would have been selfish.
Oh, thank you, Andrew.
I think publishing it is an act of selflessness, because precisely for what you've said, people coming to you and saying thank you, that's what it's about, and that's why that book had to be published, and I'm delighted that it was. Buntu, could you have written about what it's like to be an Oxford scholar and then put the book away, put the manuscript away and said, okay, well, I've resolved that, worked through that, got my anger out, now I'm moving on? Or was it a story that needed to come out?
Well, thank you for coming. You know, there was a time when I was developing as a writer in my undergrad and postgrad years, and I wrote a lot of literature across forms, and it was particularly that time that I wrote pieces that I thought were quite cathartic, because they were really more related to healing and how I related to society. But then with this particular manuscript, with Paperless, the entire necessity and the entire rationale behind Paperless was that it had to be taken out for various reasons. One was the historical uniqueness of the story, in that Paperless takes place between 2003 and 2005. And it takes place in a particular city where these kind of things do not particularly happen. You would hear of immigrant experiences in London, in Manchester, but not in Oxford. So for the first time, I had to tell the world that, you know, contrary to how Oxford is perceived as this pristine place of establishment, intelligentsia, but that you have white Oxford, black Oxford, and illegal Oxford. You know, and so I had to tell that story, and it's a story that takes place within a pre-Brexit era, and it's only I realized that after I'd written this story that, man, there were pre-Brexit signs there. So it's historical in that way, and it's also the theme of it that there's this uniqueness of this immigrant experience, and that I had to tell this story to the world, that you have this type of Oxford and you have this immigrant experience. And most importantly, that I think this is probably the first émigré novel in the South African literary landscape. And so I thought that I owe it to the world to tell the story, because usually we think of Africans having immigrant experiences elsewhere and not South Africans, really. And so I thought that I had that burden. And so the whole rationale of Paperless rested on it being told.
I love in Paperless the way that you do, there is these divisions between illegal immigrants who are legal, scholars who are there, black, white. There's all these divisions and how there are different judgments that are being made all the time about one another. It's a fascinating book, and my son is in Oxford at the moment doing a PhD, and I get almost the same kind of sense from him of both loving it and hating it, wanting it to be his home and wanting it to just explode and disappear. And that's what you feel in Buntu's book. Barbara, the American poet Dorothy Parker said, art is a form of catharsis, emotional release, purging, cleansing, and purifying. Of course, she also said, time may be a great healer, but it's a lousy beautician. But on catharsis, your response to my question, could you have written it and then put it to one side?
Well, yeah, thank you everyone for being here, and thanks for the question. I think, you know, my first novel, Grace, was more experience writing that one than this one. I don't know that I necessarily think of it as The Comrade's Wife as a cathartic novel. There were certain things that I wanted to highlight within the novel, and especially things that I'd experienced as an academic and as a black woman in academia. Those were quite central to my thinking, but once I started it, I was very concerned with craft and storytelling and telling a story, and I was concerned with really telling a story that would be compelling and that people would want to read and would be something that would be of value to others. And so when I finished it, I did put it down for a bit, and I had people then read it. I had friends who are academics and women and feminists read the novel or the manuscript. And I think in that moment, I never know when I'm writing a story whether it will actually have value outside of myself, because it does certain things for me to do it, and I'm compelled by it. So when I had people saying, yeah, this is a work that should be read by other people, that affirmed for me that it was a story worth putting out in the world. It's always quite a vulnerable process to do that.
Absolutely, yeah.
I just wanted to say something in relation to what Barbara was talking about, or the question about memoir and catharsis. In my experience of writing about relationships or difficulty or pain, so in The Eye of the Beholder, which I wrote just before this novel, in that I could describe a process of marital breakdown, completely partisan to the extremity of feeling of the character that I was writing about. When you write, for me, when I was writing nonfiction and memoir, there's a very different criteria of truth, and for me both are valid. Like sometimes you need like the extremity and the fury, but of course in writing memoir you're looking at a different type of relatedness, and there's a different criteria of truth. Not that one is truthful and the other one is a lie, but there's a different way. So for me in fiction, you can really just murder everybody that ever got on your nerves. But then when you write about your own life, you have to see maybe I was a bit of a pain myself.
Well, you've done that in fiction. You even say so in the book. You say, like some kind of enunciation, the outline of my lead character, my private investigator, my justice warrior, appeared to me. Claire Hart, who's the center of Margie's crime thrillers. Claire Hart, part avenging goddess, a modern-day fury, and part tank girl superhero, came to me fully formed and flawed, armed with her PhD in rape and femicide. So, you've got your character out there who can take her sword and slay down the patriarchy. you can't do that quite in the same way in a memoir. You need to...
Sadly not.
Yeah.
Sadly not.
If you're going to be true to your life.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Buntu, why a novel and why not a memoir? What can you do in the one that you couldn't do the other?
A lot of people keep asking me how I'm able to write through different forms, fiction, non-fiction, history, politics, and I tell them that really it really centers on the type of the message that you want to send and the best and effective platform. So I felt that I couldn't have written an essay on this. I couldn't have written a non-fiction book on this because there are a whole lot of emotions, a whole lot of pains that couldn't really be expressed in any other way other than in fiction. And so I thought it, and there are a whole lot of other things that are quite improper that could not be expressed in non-fiction forms, in non-fiction platforms. And so I thought it best then that I should express this in fiction, and that fiction could also accommodate some of the hardcore facts of non-fiction. Yeah? But of course you surround them with a whole lot of emotions, a whole lot of that ambience that fiction could absorb. So hence I felt that fiction is the best platform to express this, the times, the emotions, the sorrows, the joys, etc.
Margie, you wrote, I think, what explains your book for me.
So scary having this.
I'm a lawyer.
Read back to me.
No, you see, you can see I'm a lawyer. I like my little yellow flags. You write, writing does not only illuminate, it can also heal writer and reader by connecting them. I hugged Ellen's memoir to my chest. She taught me that a woman publicly bearing witness to her own experience is a political act. That, for me, is sort of the core of the book. Can you just talk to us a bit about what you are saying there about this book?
Okay, so Ellen is a woman called Ellen Ndeshi Namila. I'm from Namibia, and I was working in the 90s. There wasn't a TRC in Namibia as there was here, and so the only way in which the felt experience, what you're talking about, this sort of emotion and the experience of history in South Africa's occupation came out was through books that were published in the early 90s. Just a little bit of context. I was working at New Namibia Books with, and we published a whole lot of material, a range of novels, life writing, I would call it, memoir and autobiography. And Ellen Namila was exactly the same age as me. We had 3 daughters. She was from the north, and she'd gone when she was 12 in 1976, when many young black Namibians crossed over into Angola and joined Plan and joined SWAPO and stuff. And I mean, I was young when I was working with her on this story of her life. It's called The Price of Freedom. And working with Ellen and with the other writers I worked with, bringing these accounts of the experience, especially with women writing, their accounts of what had happened both in Namibia with the SADF and the apartheid sort of occupation that was going on, and then what happened when she was a plan fighter or she worked as a nurse and various things. So much of the accounting of what she taught me was this everyday testimony of what it is to be a person getting through the day and what it is to be a girl and then a woman. And there was so much requirements of silence, especially for treatment of women in the camps who were with Plan or with SWAPO, and the sort of gender violence. So I'd been working a lot with that, and there's something profound about the testimony of a person's life. I mean, much of the tradition of women's writing comes from women bearing witness to themselves. Barbara and I were just talking about this at lunchtime, like, why does it happen that what women know about politics and writing and life is lost each generation? Why are certain voices never ceded the authority of tradition? So in some ways, for me, this the writing of a memoir, and some of it was to account with sexual violence I had experienced myself. It took me 6 novels for me to work out that the reason I was writing about sexual violence is because I'd experienced it. I mean, I'm that slow. Some of you are probably not that slow, but it took me so long to write to the point of integrating that experience is a political and a communal and collective experience, and that it's worth bearing witness to for all of us who've had those experiences and have kept them to ourselves out of basically silence and shame to keep the patriarchy going. I mean, literally, you stop with that shame and you return it to sender, you free yourself, and those little patriarchs fall off their pedestals. You know, it's a really simple act. It's difficult, takes time. But, and I think that was one of the things I learned especially, is that people have said to me, you're so courageous, you talk about these things. I wasn't courageous, I just stopped metabolizing somebody else's shame. It was not mine. And that's what I realized, you know, with the victims of violence that I've worked with over the years here, is that the requirement is that the person who is, say, if it's a sexual assault, that you play out the vulnerability and shamefulness that the man who attacks you cannot tolerate in himself. He puts it into you, and then you play that VHS tape forever. Just send it back. And then it isn't about a thing of being courageous or not talking about shame. It's just, it's not yours. So that process was different for the memoir writing. I understood why I have this political activism all my life and why that's my focus, but I just could stop feeling these things. But it took me a long time, and that really pisses me off, how much time is taken from women where I could have been writing gardening manuals or something, you know, fun, because of acts of violence. You know, it's the same with, you know, Ellen Amila's book was fascinating with experience of racial violence from the army in the SADF. So they're commonalities, they're not the same, but they're those commonalities. And people from marginalized, how can I put this, where the authority of a person's voice is compromised either by gender or race or religion. That testimony, you speak for yourself and other people can find a place in that language or in that structure, I hope.
I mean, I think it's why your book is so much more than just a memoir. And I think it's why it's a selfless act to publish. Yes, and there's that too. I think that's why, for me, it's so important that it is published, because it resonates far beyond this is Margie Orford. It resonates to much bigger things. If we have time, we're going to talk at some point about how men write memoirs and how women write memoirs. Because it seems to me as though men write memoirs like, this is what I achieved, this is how I changed the world, look at me.
You could just call them manwars.
Oh, memoirs. Whereas women write memoirs about, this is what it's like to be me in the world, and I am, and I stand for and I represent others.
You can blame St. Augustine started the rot.
Yes.
And
from there, just sort of, we go into sort of Tony Leon and then beyond. Yeah. Right.
I'm scrabbling around to my Rolodex for a good manwar, but I've gone blank.
No. Barbara, this idea of bearing witness as a political act, Margie's doing it in a memoir in non-fiction. Reading your book, I felt almost the same feelings that I felt when I was reading Margie's, that it was bearing witness to one person's experiences in the world, and that it was saying something far beyond just that person. So that whether it was fiction or non-fiction, I had the same feeling. Just talk to us about what you were hoping to achieve with the book as a political statement?
Yeah, I think maybe what the similarities are between Margie and my book, although hers is a memoir and mine is a work of fiction, is that it gives you access to the interior world of a woman.
Yeah.
The interior voice, the thoughts, the feelings. And I don't think, certainly when I also study Black women's literature, that's my day job. As an academic, and certainly when I started in this field, there were very, very few interior voices of women represented. There were very few narratives that represented the lives, feelings, the experiences of women. And so I think when I write fiction, I've written a lot of fiction that hasn't been published. So I do actually leave them in my drawer, and I don't burn them, but
Okay.
they're there. You know what? That's what I'm seeking, the voice that is not represented. So when I look at some of the fiction that I've grown up on as a scholar that has influenced me, there's a lot of these like suffering, and this is a form of suffering also, but there's a particular there's like this noble Black woman who's strong and struggling, and I wanted to create this character that is fully rich and developed, and not necessarily noble. I also thought that to come back to your phrase, the act of political witnessing, or the political act of witnessing. I'm not sure how you said it, but. I think witnessing is political, and being able to set up this character as a witness, and have this particular, there are 2 years in the life of a country. The novel is set 2016 to 2018, I think. I chose a very truncated timeline, and it is of course fictionalized, but the idea of looking at what we see in discourse, in politics, in journalism, written from a very different vantage point. I think it was interesting to me to attempt that. I wasn't sure that I could pull it off. I don't know that I pull it off. But I wanted to give some sort of view that is not the usual view, I read a lot of biographies, I read a lot of political books on politics and state capture and so on for this novel. And I wanted to approach that topic, but from the intimate, from the realm of the domestic, the intimate, the sexual, the body of a woman.
It's a very central work, and it's quite interesting to read it, because as the reader, you think you know this is going horribly wrong. The main character is in love, she is deeply in love, and she explains what that feels like, and she's sensually in love as well. And you've just got a bad feeling about it. All your red flags are going off, and you want to scream at her and say, for goodness sakes, do you not see what's happening? But Barbara describes her own capture so well that it's believable. You understand that she doesn't see it. And she drifts down this river of love, and you know the dreadful waterfall is coming, and you know that catastrophe is coming, but it's unstoppable. If we can talk a little bit about vulnerability and sensitivity, because I think all 3 of your books have made you as authors vulnerable. I know you say it's not courageous, Margie. I disagree with you. I think all 3 of your books are courageous, and I know, having written my own non-fiction, how difficult it is to put yourself out there, and in writing fiction. Margie, have your daughters read the book?
My daughters, I've got 3 daughters, so they all read the book. Okay. And they just said to me, we're so proud of you, Mum. And in one, my daughters are 28 and 32 and 34, and one of the things I've had to learn being a mother is to help my daughters when they've had the troubles that all women have in their lives, because our bodies are politicized. You can't have a female body that's not somatically politicized and an object of the gaze. So one of the things I've learned about taking care of other people is that if you are honest about your own pain and how you've gone through things, you can hear when they told me things, without trying to take their experience away from them or make it like mine or sort of colonize it in any way. So perhaps the process to getting to this writing was the way that I've mothered my children, which is a system of benign neglect. But
I'm a strong advocate of benign neglect when it comes to parenting. Yeah.
But yes, I put in, a lot of the writing originally was actually cathartic, in that I wrote out all my rage and fury and outrage and all of that stuff that one can use in novels, the sort of partisan stuff. And slowly, as I put it in, I've said this before about this book, but how I imagined a memoir, and the memoirs I've loved the most, because I've read many over my life, were I thought of this book really as like a house, my own home, in which I invite people, and I said this yesterday, the laws of hospitality apply. So you invite someone to your home, you appear properly dressed, for one. You provide people with something to eat and to drink, places to sit, they can explore the thing, but a guest, like a child, must always be able to leave freely and kind of restored from the visit to me. So the memoirs to me that don't work is when the writer has not resolved things in themselves. Then you get the feeling of being beaten down by the person. So the things I haven't understood in my life, or where I still feel I can't integrate them, I have taken them out not to be untruthful, but because it would just, I don't understand it yet. It's not that it's secret, it's just not understood. And one of the great gifts that the book gave me was, I was married for a very, very long time. It restored to me the real love and joy and delight 15 more years of a 25-year marriage, which I had lost in my unhappiness. And that was such a gift. But that came, I think, from being truthful. I had to be truthful to the experience of the time, over time. You have to be truthful to yourself as a young person where you didn't know stuff. And then you get to forgive. And I was, for me with the memoir, I thought I could only give an account of myself. I cannot speculate or know what other people felt or did, and I don't think I've really done that.
Well, so you've treated others with great sensitivity and care.
They're all much nicer than me. Seriously, they're much nicer than me. But a friend of mine, and my editor actually in London, she said to me, she read it and she said, "This is such an interesting book." I was very struck by this. She said, "It's so open without being confessional." And I immediately took that as a compliment. But that idea that the confessional, my readers are not Catholic priests.
Yeah.
But it's not a confession, it's a understanding, perhaps, sort of.
Yeah, I think male memoirs quite like the confessional scandal too. It's a selling point, perhaps. Buntu, I think of myself as quite a naive writer because I struggle with a lot of aspects of writing. One of the things I struggle with is having a male character who's dislikable, who's a sort of a misogynist or maybe a racist, or because I feel somehow people are going to read that and go, aha, there's the real Andrew Brown sneaking out. Honestly, I'm being honest. I struggle with this idea of writing male characters who portray some of the awful masculinity that we see around us. Some of your male characters, you have them saying and doing things that are out there as I mean, they are being masculine in some of the worst possible ways. I mean, the one has, just as an example, one of them has a poster up on his door, in his dormitory, that says, "The management takes no responsibility for the loss of virginity in this room." That kind of thing. Now,
That's quite witty.
no, it is quite witty, but it's also a bit you. Are you making yourself, do you feel you're making yourself vulnerable when you write a character like that? Or are you sensible and mature enough that it doesn't worry you?
No, I think one of the things that really gets to me is writing in a very contrived way, writing in a very contrived and artificial way, and you really feel then that you are not really getting to the meat of it. You're not really getting to the true meaning of it. And so I felt that I had to reflect all the sensibilities and all the truthfulness of the characters and the truthfulness of the ambience of the times that this novel meant to reflect. And these truths, they range on race, on sexism, on class clashes, and I had to portray them, I think, the way they were reflected, particularly in that context and particularly in those times. And that is why also, Andrew, that I felt also compelled to portray the gendered aspects of immigration in the novel as they were, and how the females, the women who were part of the South African illegal cohort had different experiences and felt that, like your character, Barbara, as you've expressed it, Andrew, that, going down through the river, that there was this sense of disruption. And so you have a character, a female character, a woman character in Paperless, who's now saying, I will not have my life disrupted and taken away so completely. And immigration is going to help me to redeem some of the life of part of a huge part of my life that I've lost through this interaction, through this gender dynamics with my husband. And you also have women characters who are running away from their past and are saying that through this portal of immigration, I may be able to resurrect myself, which is something that male characters in this novel do not treat immigration in that way. So I had to reflect and I had to portray these in a truthful way, however dislikable that they were, because what was more dislikable was really presenting an introverted and artificial, politically correct perspective of a world that wasn't.
I think political correctness and wokeness is a real problem in fiction writing. How one deals with it, I'm not entirely sure. Barbara, you have gone somewhere where the other two of them didn't dare. Since we're talking about courage, yes, I told you we're going to talk about sex. Yeah, we're now going to talk about writing sex. So there's nothing harder in this world than writing a sex scene in a book that works. I have written one detailed sex scene in Refuge. It was voted the best sex scene in South African literature. Admittedly by
low stakes.
Low stakes. Admittedly by my two best friends, and we were on our second bottle of wine. But still, as a writer, I take accolades from wherever I can get them.
Barbara and I run workshops called Writing the Body and Writing and Healing.
Okay. So I'm hopelessly out of my depth. Yeah. What I do know from that experience is how hard it is to write a sex scene. Your book is so sensual. The sexuality in it is so heartfelt and real. I really found it quite extraordinary. But at the same time, as a writer, I was thinking, oh my word, you're making yourself vulnerable here. How did you do this? So talk to us a little bit about that.
The only thing worse than writing a sex scene, Andrew, is now having to talk about it in front of...
you have a safe word. If you need to use it, you can use it.
You know, I really wanted to write sex scenes. I know it sounds very, you know, I'm cringing as I'm sitting here. I'm having a huge internal meltdown. But I really wanted to write them in a way that was beautiful and sensitive, and because I want to show that aspect of life. Because I think when I say we, I talk as a black woman, I think we're so muted when it comes to the sexual, or there are ways in which we are allowed to be sexual, which is respectable. You know, I use the word ordentlikheid a lot in the novel, and this character is going against that quite a bit. So, but the actual writing of it, you know, I rewrote them so many times. I wrote them and rewrote them and rewrote them, and one of my first readers said, "This is a bit like Mills and Boons-ish. You know, are you sure you're an academic? Do you want to publish this?" Like, and it was Mills and Boons-ish, and then I had the amazing good fortune of Helen Moffat being my editor, and Helen was just extraordinary. She's an amazing editor. She's so talented and gifted and wonderful, and she's a feminist, and she knew what I wanted to do. And so this is funny. We would meet for editing sessions in this coffee shop in Noordhoek, and Helen is a bit hard of hearing, so she speaks loud. She just, you know, sometimes people who are hard of hearing speak loudly. Yeah. And so one time I went to the toilet and I came back and she said, "Now, where were we? You were writhing on the bed." So
you either clear the coffee shop or suddenly there's a whole lot of people
on the bed
waiting for the next.
So, you know, I think I am learning to develop a thick skin, and I think I'm going to write more sex scenes.
Oh, good.
Spiteful.
Oh, good. Excellent.
Thank you.
I mean, the problem with sex scenes
Andrew,
is
can
the
I just say,
vocabulary.
this is not a confessional for you, hey?
I thought it was a safe space, Margie. Are you telling me it's not a safe space? Oh,
Yeah,
shit.
not for you.
Now you tell me. I mean, part of the problem is the vocabulary, apart from anything else, that is sorely lacking when it comes to these things. When men write sex scenes, I'm going to ask you this.
Well, they're those annual awards.
They are.
They win hands down every
But it's
year.
always conquest, and I mean, it's what we've become nauseatingly familiar when it's a sex scene written by a man. There's so few that I am aware of well-constructed sensual and sexual scenes written by women about women. Can a man write that scene?
You're asking permission.
No. Because I do not intend to venture there, but I'm just interested in your response about how do we write intimacy? I mean, you and I have had this debate before, Margie. Can we write other people's stories? And we've agreed, yes, we can. If you write with integrity, you can write anybody else's story. But now, can I write the intimacy of a woman if I'm a male writer?
I think you can. I mean, I think that one of the most helpful ways of thinking actually is the funny old Bloomsbury group. Yes. Virginia Woolf and Vera, who thought of, you know, the interior of the mind as sort of androgynous, and that you could experience he or she, female or male experience, and everything in between. Peak pleasure seemed to be Sherry, but anyway, so we'll move on from that. But one of I think what Barbara raises is that there's a massive lack of vocabulary and record of the embodied female experience, if I can use fancy writing, fancy words. Yeah. So the idea of female pleasure in some ways is far more taboo than female shame, because that's been eroticized and turned around. If you think of all the movies we've ever seen, the only realistic representation of the horror and fear and degradation of a rape is in Deliverance, that 1970s movie where a young man is raped by some hillbilly fisherman. Every single other scene I've ever seen is eroticized by the gaze. So we're going back to this Laura Mulvey's idea of how you look at women and how they represent themselves. So the language that we have, that's why it's radical in many ways over and over again to rewrite how it is to be a person. I think most women, I didn't know how it is to be myself. I only know myself through representations which come through this sort of masculine thing. So one of the ways of writing pleasure or fear or tranquility or rest or whatever, how it is to be in the body is very important. And the thing I understood the responses to my memoirs, so many men have written to me, as I told you, saying, you really helped us understand the women we've lived with, the women we've loved, the ones who can't say anything to us, who have told us things that we don't understand. And I thought, there's not enough real, true explaining, it's starting to come, of how it feels and how we experience it and how we experience what men do. One of the things I think is also important, perhaps what's more taboo, is the vulnerability and gentleness that people are capable of. I mean, I really do think the gender that we're assigned and that values with it is a construction. It feels like it's in the body. But it's not, but it's completely taboo in any ways for men to express their fear and the vulnerability of the male body. I mean, there's nothing that hurts more is that dangly bit. You know, that's meant to be like conquering the world. So there's a paradox, right? The most vulnerable thing is the thing that's meant to be all-powerful. I'm sorry for the technical language. It's based on a delusion.
Yeah.
And I mean, I just want to say...
See, here's this question of vocabulary, but anyway, the dangly bit, yeah.
But the person who's influenced my writing the most was Tsitsi Dangaremba. When I read Nervous Conditions, when it first came out, it blew my mind. That intimacy of the physical and the politics of writing Little Tambu and Nyasha. And then her whole series of that. She's been my guide. Her and Annie Ernaux, the French writer, who writes, you know, the sort of life writing, of just the sort of frankness. Annie Ernaux goes a bit far for me, maybe, but the sort of frankness of their accounting. And asking yourself, why is that not allowed? Who can't see this? That it must be hidden. And it's usually masculine eyes who need to be protected from the reality of things.
Fascinating stuff. We are running out of time, and I have been asked to let you have an opportunity to ask any questions yourself. So is there anyone? There's a roving mic, and we will ask you to wait for the mic. But just put your hand up if you would like to ask any of the three authors any questions.
Free sex advice.
Free sex advice, how to write the ultimate sex scene.
It's so sad. You reach a certain age and all you can do is write a sex scene. You know, when you're 20, no 20-year-old.
Yes, there's no time to write a sex scene. You're too busy having sex to write a sex scene.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a question at the back there, yeah. Is that mic working? No.
Can't hear.
I'm going to swap the mic quickly. Okay, here it comes back to you. All right.
Hello, everybody.
Hi.
I just wanted to ask the question is, like, I know it's hard to separate the artist from the art, right? At what point when you're writing do you decide that what I'm writing is fiction or non-fiction? Because there's some point where you say that when you're writing fiction, right, you can go for anyone. You can be guttural and visceral, and then you have some kind of like indemnity clause because it's fiction. If someone does ask you and it's too much, you're just like, it's fiction. So at what point do you write in terms of also of politics, because it becomes so serious, because you are stating your own opinion about political situations. So at what point do you decide that this is fiction or non-fiction, and what makes you decide that? Like, what do you do?
Maybe you want to try and answer that one?
Well, I've written both non-fiction and fiction. And of course, you have the conventional tools and you have the conventional processes on how to write nonfiction and fiction. And with nonfiction, particularly, let's say, if you're writing a historical nonfiction book, that you have to follow certain research methodological processes. But what is important, a more important question really is, how impactful can you make both of these texts, in that you have to put yourself into them. And the reader can sense also from both fiction and nonfiction that there isn't any of you here. Yeah, that there isn't any of you here emotionally, intellectually, and the reader can sense that the energy is off. It's just you technically writing, transferring this knowledge. So that is more important, and it's really difficult then to define how you transfer that energy, that passion that the reader can feel on the other side. Thanks.
Can I say something?
Yes, please.
In response to that, I think that, to me, writing is a deeply ethical, it has all sorts of ethical requirements. So one of the things I've written about, apart from in my fiction, the most is how to write about violence.
Yeah.
It's really been my concern from the beginning. And for me, writing is an act of generosity and towards myself and towards the world, and I want to make things understood, and I really feel one has a ethical contract with the reader that you will be truthful. How that truth is expressed in nonfiction and in fiction is different. But, you know, the people I want to fight with, I call them. When you're writing something, for me, I think, and for most of us, we're writing in a way in which experience is distilled and understood, and other people can be entertained, transported, make them laugh or whatever. It's like you want to give them something, give people something, inflict it on them, and to share. But you have to do it in a, like you were saying, comes from a kind of integrity, and then it finds the form that particular story needs to be told. I mean, most books where you feel bashed by the writer, or that they've got an axe to grind with their mom who's like hardly disguised, you stop reading the book. You just think, okay, dude, therapy for you, but I'm not wasting time.
I mean, we can't, as readers, we can't be the author's therapists, so we can't be having to deal with their unresolved things. I think you have to have confidence as well in your authors. You know, if you pick up a Margie Orford or a Buntu or a Barbara Boswell, you've got confidence that this author is going to be truthful and have integrity, and you can enter into that book with a certain degree of faith. There's nothing worse than picking up a book and you're not so sure, that you haven't got the kind of confidence that you should have in your author. Barbara, one of the things that was deeply satisfying in your book was her revenge. And it was, I mean, it was a sort of Claire Hart kind of revenge. It was swords out and take no prisoners. And it's just so deeply satisfying. It must have been deeply satisfying to write it, I would imagine.
Yeah, I don't know. I was worried about, does it work? And so I had a lawyer read it.
Okay.
And they said, this is actually the real fiction of the book, because this is like the outcome of what happens, not to do plot spoilers, is highly actually unlikely to happen. So
I think it works, absolutely. And it's deeply satisfying, which I think is important in a book like that, because you're so frustrated with where this is going, and you're so wanting to get involved yourself to make it right. That when that happened, I think it was deeply satisfying. We're nearly at an end. Are there any other questions? Yes, there's a question over here. There's a mic coming.
Hi, this isn't really a question, but just reflecting on writing about sex. And for me, one of the best writing about sex happens in 50 Shades of Grey for women. I don't know, whether that's not PC, but does anybody agree with me? Really?
50 Shades of Grey, stand up, please. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, sure.
I just wanted what Barbara was talking about, that like ship, the ninja section, when you get the revenge. That's a wonderful thing about fiction.
Yes.
For me, in that you can create ideas of liberation, which to me is very important. One doesn't have resolution much in real life, or even much 50 Shades of Grey pleasuring. But in fiction, you can have this thing where you can imagine oneself, or the characters imagines this idea where a woman is empowered, for example. Someone does get the scholarship. And I think that liberatory effect is very important.
Yeah, you can imagine outcomes that perhaps would not happen in reality, and you can write that into being in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think it does work. I think there's a difference in literature between, your characters in a deep, dark, impenetrable well, and then with one big jump, they've suddenly released themselves, and there's that kind of disbelief, that lack of credibility in that kind of writing. And then there's what Barbara does, which is, I think, I'm a lawyer, and I didn't feel, ooh, no, you're pushing it too far. Yes, it's fiction, but it's deeply satisfying fiction, and we write fiction for that very reason, that you can make up things that we would like the world to work that way. And why not write them that way then? Yeah. We are out of time, but we've got one question over there. Let's squeeze that question. Yeah.
Okay. So just to continue with the comment that was just made now, the language of sex is very violent upon female bodies, and it's a question to Barbara and Margie. How do you use that language, which is very violent upon female bodies, to write sex scenes for women that is gentle and sensitive to the vulnerabilities and the silences that are found within that space?
Barbara is the person who has successfully written that scene. You need to answer that one.
I also read a lot of rape, and I read a lot of scholarship about rape. I teach about rape and representation, and I wanted to write something from the point of view of a woman as a sexual agent. The first sexual encounter in the book is initiated by the woman,
yes.
And it's pleasurable and it's enjoyable, and I wanted to just, and I don't think the what I write is erotica. I wouldn't call it that. Someone called it academic erotica, and I thought, what the hell? And
That is super
It's like
niche.
such a... I thought the two were contrary.
I didn't want to write an erotic novel about her like self-discovery of her sexual self the whole way.
Yeah.
But I wanted to have these sexual encounters that were pleasurable and enjoyable, and not only painful and to be endured. I think there's a line where she says, my husband is a lover who I don't merely have to endure, I actually look forward to having sex with him. But I also wanted to write, there is violence in the novel. There's a kind of emotional violence, not physical violence. And I also wanted to explore how sex is used as a tool of seduction and compliance to when there's a relationship where sex is used as a tool for actually smoothing things over, and how that works, when you have a very good sexual relationship with someone, is maybe like, oh, I can overlook that little thing because we'll just have sex and it'll make it all better. And I think, that's quite a common thing. And I wanted to write about that.
Just to answer you, one of the things I tried to map in my memoir was how, and I am fortunate enough to have had some wonderful sex in my life, so it's...
Good to know, Margie.
Yeah. Not joking, please. I've had some very inept sort of like Labrador legs. Anyway,
Let's not go to the inept ones here, please.
But what I was really struck by when I started to examine my own life, and it sort of was, I went from the sort of more academic, which is somewhere like with Barbara, similar concerns, is a safer place to start, is how, as a young adolescent, a teenage girl, and then growing up, I had no idea actually what physical agency meant, and that I had no idea about anything. So I describe an assault that happened, which I'm sure so many of us has happened at a school dance when I was 15 or 16. It was absolutely awful. And it stayed in me, but I had no idea. I thought I had to go along with that somehow. So no one had ever sat me down from when I was tiny and said, your body is your own, and if something doesn't feel right, that person is doing something wrong with you. There's not something wrong with your response. So I think that the conversations about enjoyment and whatever you want to enjoy, many people like the sort of games of power and dominance, and you're playing safely with something that exists in the real world. And I think for me, if I could rerun my life, I would have liked more of that, to be told that women are entitled to pleasure and entitled to the word no, and that if a man is upset, it's his problem. Your job is not to please and placate. And that pleasing and placating starts with, take your dad a cup of tea, he's so tired, do this for that, carry, all the pleasing we have to do in the wider world comes to the body. And then we're so amazed if someone like half bothers to make an effort.
So in Barbara's book, there are a whole bunch of red flags that go off for you about the male character from an early stage. And one of the first ones was the sex scene. Because he's just so adept and so caring and so selfless. And my red flags are just going, no, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with this guy. This isn't right. I don't like this at all. And sure enough, I'm right. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for a lovely session, and enjoy the rest of it.